Hi, this is Paul. In some ways, me making a commentary on a Jonathan Peugeot video is a little redundant because there's probably no one on my channel that will have seen this video that hasn't already seen Jonathan's video, especially because I really agree with Jonathan on this video. I found this video to be super helpful, but I want to take it a little bit further because I think what Jonathan is pointing out here is so vital and so important, and I think so applicable to what's going on all around us. So, Jonathan is who's ever editing Jonathan's video, they're sort of keeping up with the times, and we get the names, we get the letters down below, and you get the little teaser. And as with many videos that have sort of the teaser, we talked about this in today's live stream about Rogan and Peterson, that in some ways we have sort of the normal video is ordinary time, and the teaser is sort of, that which is higher or sort of selected out of it. So let's just go right ahead.
That has been the tool of the left wing since the post-war era. That is, push against what people find acceptable. Push as hard as you can. And if people don't react, keep pushing. Keep provoking the categories. Keep pushing against people's standards. And then when people react too strongly, then say, no, it's ambiguous. Then open up the ambiguity. Say, that's not what we meant. That's not what we're actually referencing. Open up the space so that you don't have an enemy to punch. And it's all very fluid and all very ambiguous. And then, but what you want is to find just enough reaction to be able to wedge. And if you can wedge and gaslight at the same time, it's even better. So then you can wedge and you can create two sides, and you can force people to take your side and then force people to be against you. And then, like I said, if you can gaslight at the same time, it's even better, because then you can say, they have no reason to attack us. Look at how defenseless we are. Look at how we're victims. They misunderstood us, and although they misunderstood us, they're attacking us anyways. And so now, we feel morally justified to continue to push. And so this is exactly what we're seeing, when you look at the boxing matches.
Okay, so there's basically the heart of his argument, and I want to go into it a little bit further. So if you remember CRC Synod, Herb always wears the bib overalls. Clay thought he was sort of, was pro Felicity that he'd wear the bib overalls. I'm very much planning on having Herb on the channel. I just haven't. It's, of course, since Nancy's death, things have been just a little bit crazy. And once everything settles down, I hope to have Herb on the channel and get his story a little bit more. But the one speech he gave at Synod that just rang in my ears was, he was saying, sort of out of exasperation, and then was reminded by the chair to speak to the topic. But it was very similar to what Jonathan said here, because he said there's a tendency by some to find the guardrail and hit it, because you just want to keep pushing those boundaries. And I think what Jonathan said right there sort of sets up a dynamic that we've seen played over and over and over again. And I don't know that people consciously follow this script. I think this script gets replayed again and again and again in different places. And I want to talk a little bit also today. I haven't said anything on Twitter, partly because the way the conversation is unfolding on Twitter and on YouTube has been sort of horrifying. But I was greatly relieved and refreshed by Sam and Tripp and Bethel's conversation about the Shepherds for Sale. I haven't bought the book yet. I'm planning on buying the book because I very much want to read it, because we have this sort of back and forth dynamic, which I think is so often needlessly destructive. And I thought there was just a ton of wisdom that Bethel and Tripp and Sam laid out in their hour and 48-minute live stream that followed my live stream. I was able to listen to it in bits and pieces today, in between other things I had to do after I did my own live stream. But this dynamic that Jonathan sort of laid out, we just see happening again and again and again. Now let's listen to a little bit more of what Jonathan has to say. We can zip through the pretty song and the nice mosaic. And now, having it's so interesting because, again, as I mentioned in the live stream today, having been to Europe and seen more and more, when I look at a mosaic like this, I'm thinking, oh, this sort of reminds me of the Basilica San Marcos in Venice, where you had all this gold tile just covering the roof. And I'm going to have more to say about that because, of course, I've only had a chance to do a fraction of the videos I want to do because I've been busy with, more important stuff. My day job, my local job here as pastor of Living Stones, that's my first priority. And when things happen here that sort of fills my schedule, the videos take a hit. That's just the way it's got to be. So let's listen a little bit more, Jonathan.
Hello, everyone. With the surprising success of my last video on the Olympics and the opening ceremony, I wasn't thinking that I'll be making videos on the Olympics, but because there are other things going on with the whole question of the male-female boxing situation that is happening, and I'm seeing that explode as well. And I'm also noticing that for many people, things are a little confusing and they're not certain, what is happening and why all of this is happening. But there's a direct relationship between what happened at the opening ceremony and the controversy that's going on with the female boxing situation. And so I thought that it would be a good idea to talk about it, maybe to help people understand the general situation and, that it's not just really about male to female boxing, but that there are bigger things at stake. And so as you can see, I'm not in my usual place. I'm actually right now on the island of Samos. I'm here for Ralston College. All you young people in your 20s.
Just made a very rare Friday Freddie and Paul show. Freddie came with Chemo. Chemo and Pete are practicing for Sunday, and Chemo picked Freddie up to give Freddie something to do. So Freddie came to church and popped in, and can we do a Freddie and Paul show? So we just did a Freddie and Paul show, and that'll be up before this one. So okay, let's continue.
If you don't know about Ralston College, you should definitely check it out. It is one of the great things happening in our world today, something that is giving us hope, giving me hope, and so I'm really happy to be here to support them in any way that I can.
Now, this is a little aside, but it's very interesting what's happening. I thought about making a video about this, but I really didn't have enough time for a whole video. Maybe it would be just a short video. It's very interesting what's happening because Peterson Academy is sort of online social media, and Ralston College is kind of the opposite. That's, if you want to learn Greece, go to Ephesus. If you want to learn Latin, probably go to Rome if you want to. And so Ralston College is very local and personal, and Peterson Academy is very online. And so it's interesting how this attempt to sort of rediscover and rework university is sort of starting at the edges.
And so one of the things that happened during the opening ceremony was a celebration of gender ambiguity. And so that is what we talked about in our last video, that the use of drag queens, but it wasn't just gender ambiguity, it was ambiguity in general, and ambiguity as a political tool, you could say. The fact that the reference of the whole gender problem that happened, the fact that there's contestation about whether or not it was the Last Supper, or whether it's just the Feast of Dionysus, and all these people fighting over that, has to do with the question of ambiguity. It's an image of the drag queen themselves as an image of ambiguity, and how ambiguity causes a drift between categories and causes confusion, and and that confusion can be used politically because.
Now, again, I think if you connect this with a while ago, he talked about ritual and repetition, and he talked about, let's say, a path. If you live in a village and there's the river where you get your water, very quickly you're going to have a path. And ritual is basically the creation of that path. And that's the way you do it. And what happens with ritual, and anybody who has little children knows this, because you do something twice and suddenly children see a ritual, especially if they liked it, and they're going to then appeal to it. Like if every Christmas you give gifts in a certain way, then suddenly, well, this is the way we give gifts. And rituals sort of set everything at ease and give the community a sense of cohesion and settledness. But of course, in any ritual, it's not exactly arbitrary, but there are things that you could have done differently. And then when you see a whole differences of communities, there are different communities that have rituals. And again, pluralism stalks behind just about everything. We live in this globalized world, and all different rituals have developed. And Jonathan's making this point about ambiguity. And ambiguity it's not a bad thing, but you have to understand that it's something that sort of unsettles. And again, unsettling is not a bad thing. Some things deserve to be unsettled and maybe can be resettled in a different way. But I think Jonathan is right that often if ambiguity is sort of say okay, there's ambiguity here, let's push on that. And again, that itself is not a bad thing. As a preacher, a very common tactic that you use in preaching and teaching, as one of my old seminary professors who was he was a grade school teacher, and he taught at all these levels and eventually taught teaching at Calvin Seminary, Spud Snapper, raise dissonance. And what ambiguity does is sort of raises dissonance, and it forces then the community to think about everything and hopefully to look at nuance. So again, this whole process is not a bad thing. Now, at the same time, just because it's not a bad thing, it doesn't mean it's something that we should always do, because I remember, talking to, say, young preachers, sometimes they throw all kinds of things out, they raise all kinds of ambiguities, and sometimes you want to say, don't raise more ambiguity than you can sort of land, because the goal of that is to sort of raise ambiguity, try and find an improvement, and then settle things back down, because you cannot live with constant chaos, constant turmoil, constant ambiguity. What you tend to get then is, I think a lot of what we're seeing in the culture, what you tend to get then is sort of a reactive hardening of against everything new. Now again, just as human beings goes, there are temperaments, there are scales of temperament, and some people are really high in openness and they like ambiguity and they like open things, and some people are low in openness and high in conscientiousness, and they very much want everything to be settled, and they want to know what all the clear roles are so that these roles can be fulfilled. Both of these ways have their places, and so what you do in a community is you always sort of have to balance, enough openness so that the openness people can express themselves and do their things, but not too much openness that you sort of cause a rift in the community. And I think part of what we're seeing is often intentional rifting of communities. So I've read very interesting book about Pius XI and Pius XII, and now I'm reading a book on the Spanish Civil War. And, part of what happened in the 1930s was the Russian Revolution so destabilized sort of the European imaginary. And it isn't just the Russian Revolution that provoked this. The Russian Revolution, of course, had its old cause. The Russian Revolution came in really a state which was fairly authoritarian, both in terms of the church and the Tsar. I mean, even the name is sort of synonymous with authoritarianism. And, of course, with serfdom, and it was fairly repressive. And so you get this explosion. And, well, when you get this explosion, you get this radical new idea, and this is supposed to solve everything. Now, in Spain, of course, you kind of had a similar thing. You had a monarchy, and you had the church, and sort of the monarchy and the church together, as in some ways you had in the French Revolution. You can see all of these disruptions in Europe as things are changing. Now, why are things changing? There's a whole huge reasons why things are changing. Technology is changing, society is changing, education is changing, and in some ways you needed more flexibility. I think part of the reason democracies fared better through this, as number one, democracies tended to already have a lot of the fruit of those transformations built into them. The nature of democracy itself also affords changes. And so democracies tended to weather better. And so what you had was sort of a rigidity that left zero ambiguity, then an explosion which created enormous chaos, which would lead to some form of authoritarianism, which, of course, in Central Europe, in Germany and Italy, became fascism, and also in Spain. In Russia, of course, you had communism, because in many ways, this goes all the way back to Peterson's sort of first thing that he came out with, Order and Chaos. You sort of want to have the right amount of both. And if you can have the right amount of both, you can actually make progress. A little bit of ambiguity is good, but too much ambiguity, and if you push it too hard, well, then you tend to get this dynamic that we saw unfolding in the 20th century.
One of the things you can do is that once you create confusion and you create uncertainty, you can wedge that uncertainty and you can force people to take one side or the other of a question. That is
and I think again, that's a super important insight that Jonathan makes here, because instead of, okay, we see the ambiguity, well, let's have a conversation about the ambiguity. Let's say, okay, well, here's an ambiguity. Let's figure out what to do about it. But it's sort of employed, and it's not just employed by people who want to do this. We now have these cultural patterns and these social platforms like social media that are designed for polarization because, of course, drama and chaos and conflict attract attention, and all of these social medias use attention to generate wealth, that we've got all of this polarization going on. So I think Jonathan describes it perfectly. You not only recognize ambiguity that's been around for a very long time, you force it on people. You just keep pushing it in their face. And most people will be like, just leave me alone. I've got plenty to handle in my own life. And you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they finally push back. And you can watch this on the playground all the time. If you've got a kid who wants attention and isn't getting the attention that they want, they start pestering, they start picking at, I had 5 kids. You'd watch this all the time with kids. They start picking at things. They start picking at each other. And they push and they push and they push and they push. And finally, they're going to get a reaction. And it's not always the reaction that they want. But I think Jonathan nicely sort of sets up the dynamic here that not only is there sort of the push, push, push reaction, but there's another mode to this play where then the person who pushes, and again, my kids do this all the time on the playground. You push, push, push. Finally, someone gets upset. You see this on NBA, on the floor of the NBA. Someone is sort of, they're doing all these things that are annoying, and finally, the person that they're guarding gets angry and just pushes them, and then they get the foul called on them. And it's like, he's been pushing me the whole game. And this is exactly what we're doing as a society. It's a stupid game.
Of course, the culture war, and we're seeing the culture war come at full force within the Olympics. Now, what I hope to do is to maybe help people think through some of the things that are happening, so that we don't have reactionary approach to the question, and that we don't just take sides in the culture war just to take sides. Now,
and I 100% agree with Jonathan here, because there's so much pressure now to take a side. And again, as I read books about the 1930s, it's just laden with this kind of stuff. You have to take a side, because if you're not with us, you're against us. And then there are all these little tests. You have to say these words. You have to have these politics. You have to do these things. And again, this was all there in Jesus' culture war too, because these things just repeat. You have to do all of these things to prove that you're on our side. And in fact, the more extreme you are over here, the more you can prove you're on our side. And of course, both sides do this. And just saying that will annoy some people. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's a stupid dynamic. And I really appreciate what Jonathan did here, because if you watch the dynamic and see the dynamic, this gets into the religion and the, if you can sort of see it, you can take a step back and say, now, I don't need to be subject to this spirit. I don't need to be subject to this dynamic. And I can understand the game that people are playing, and I can sort of refuse to take a side or act in the certain way or use the language that either side is demanding that I use. Now, right now in evangelicalism, and I really appreciate what they, towards the end of the video, Sam made, I thought, the great observation that a lot of what's happening in evangelicalism right now is that sort of the old consensus from the 80s and 90s collapsed, and even into the early aughts, and evangelicals are trying to rethink basically the relationship between religion and politics, and between church and state, and between confessionality and pluralism. Because you can't be plural inside you. You always sort of have a position, and that position, if it has any coherence, it's going to take a stand in some place or another. But then you're going to have to relate to people who take different stands. And right now, what's going on over this book, Shepherds for Sale, I didn't know much about the book. Gavin Ortland was like, why are they picking on me in this book? And Sam and I had exactly the same initial reactions, like, Gavin Ortland is the kind of guy that you're going to notice as a sellout? He's not even that successful. Why pick on him? I could think of lots of other candidates for this. But then Bethel and Tripp sort of walked through a lot of it. But again, the dynamics that are unfolding in this whole little internecine fight are exactly what Jonathan Pageau is talking about. And if you see the dynamic, it's really helpful to just take a step back and take a deep breath and say, well, let's see if there's some things here that are actually really important to look at and to consider. And I haven't read the book yet, but according to these three people that I respect and admire, they say there is, so I just kind of assume that there is, because that's how trust relationships work. And I'm sure I'd have disagreements with them, just because, when all of us get together, we always have different disagreements about something. But, when I'm watching this, I'm thinking, well, this is exactly why you want a community. And what, this little corner has sort of become a community where we sort of know each other, and we multiply the number of voices, and we try to enlarge the number of relationships, so that we're not just sort of beholden to people way up on hierarchies, because there's never enough time to know all those people way up on hierarchies, because hierarchies bind and blind. So let's have some other smaller hierarchies around us, so we can. Bethel knows Megan Bashan, and Sam has watched very closely Gavin Ortland, and these guys watch things that I don't watch, and I'm politically a little bit different than they are. And so, but together we can actually have a reasonable conversation about this and step out of the dynamic. Now, let's play a little bit more Jonathan.
Sometimes it is important to fight for things that you think are worthy and are important to fight for, but we have to be careful not to be roped in and seduced by our anger into these two camps that are set up in a manner how can I say this? And there are all these beautiful ways that it's being set up in this question. We're being forced to take sides, let's say, in a culture war. So like I said, one of the things that happened during the opening ceremony was this ambiguity that is being celebrated. It is, of course, the ambiguity of Carnival.
And he's watched through that, and of course most of you have watched through the video already, and you can watch it again if you haven't watched. And by all means, if probably the Orthodox and the Catholics are going to take a pass on this, but if you're sort of in the Protestant evangelical space, I thought this was just a wonderful video. But to me, when I think about, okay, so there's all these dynamics going on all over the place. How should we act? And I think, this will come as a great surprise to you, me being a Christian minister and all, I think you should look at Jesus. I think you should look at Jesus, and I think you should read the Gospels. Because if you have a sense of the kind of culture war that was going on in Jesus' day, all of these same dynamics applied. And in fact, if you have an understanding of the culture war that's going on in Jesus' day, and you look at the kinds of traps that people are trying to set for Jesus, like, well, do you pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus gives these answers that sort of, they don't know what to do with him. Now that obviously gets Jesus dead. So what kind of advice am I giving you? Am I going to make you really popular amongst the two camps of just about any fight that are out there? Jesus said, well, they'll hate you like they hated me, so maybe you don't want to listen to my advice. But what Jesus was so adept at watching these dynamics and saying, no, I'm not going to be in your camp, and I'm not going to be in your camp. I'm not going to be in either of your camp. Why? And Jesus did that so masterfully. You know, the story where the sinful woman, he's at a party, and this woman with a bad reputation in town comes and washes his feet. And the people of the party are like, well, if this guy is such a holy man, and if he had so much insight, and if he, was who people say he was, he would certainly know the reputation of this woman, and he wouldn't let her wash his feet. And Jesus turns that whole thing around on them and says, you didn't wash my feet. Why do you think she washes my feet? And then, of course, the kinds of statements he makes are so dramatic, where, well, those who have little to forgive aren't very grateful. Those who have a lot to be forgiven are tremendously grateful. Well, why would you think she's being forgiven by washing your feet? So, right now there's all kinds of issues, and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and the social media platforms are just begging for us to square off. And the same is true in this insane political environment that we find ourselves. Now we're in an election year in the United States, and it's my least favorite time because I find people lose their mind about this stuff. And it comes every 4 years. It just does. And it's going to come again, Lord willing. It just will. And there'll be 2 more candidates. Part of me wishes that we had more options because I'm seldom satisfied with either of the options that I'm given. But read the Gospels. Learn from Jesus. Figure out this dynamic, see this dynamic that Peugeot is pointing to, and just like he said, take a step back. You don't have to follow and react along with everyone else. Don't be afraid. Well, maybe I'll play a little bit of the salmon trip and Bethel video because I thought they had tons of wisdom and good advice in there.
This whole conversation around Basham's book and Ortland and stuff like that is the downstream ramifications of Donald Trump. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that
And I have to
Basham,
leave in 5 minutes. This is such a great, huge topic. Okay. I'll let you guys.
Basham is not just a Trumper who's just like MAGA against the non-MAGA Christians. That's not what it was at all. I was actually expecting way more of that than I got from her. Her book was very detailed, very well written, and I will even say nuanced and complex and delicate in the way that she was juggling multiple balls at the same time.
Yeah.
If you're expecting this to be some sort of MAGA anti-woke screed, it isn't.
Nope.
So with that caveat said, a lot of this still has to do with Donald Trump.
It does, yeah.
And the way evangelicals, especially when we were sort of growing up, 90s, 2000s, sort of peak Christian right, starting to have really strong connections with the GOP and the Republican Party, George W. Bush, all that sort of thing, that I think a lot of evangelicals felt they got a raw deal out of that political settlement.
Yep.
And then the George W. Bush Reagan part of the party has really just died, mostly because Donald Trump, really. And now the evangelicals and fundamentalists are trying to refigure out how where do we fit?
The only caveat,
and how do we relate to things like maybe we did a little bit too much preaching of politics from the pulpit and we shouldn't do that. Oh, that leaves us susceptible to these weird left-wing influence campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think that a lot of this is just figuring out how
and after reading that book about Pius the 11th and Pius the 12th, I know there's a bunch of Catholics that are really defensive about those books. And I understand that. But after actually reading those books, I had a fair amount of compassion for Pius the 11th and Pius the 12th, because figuring this stuff out is super hard. And given the positions that they had, there's often sort of no-win situations that you're faced with.
Christian right, what it even is anymore. Who are the institutions we trust? How do we coordinate our actions together? And how do we interact with politics? And all of that's just completely in flux. And Megan, for better and for worse, just dropped a grenade on the whole thing that probably needed to happen.
She absolutely did it. Trip, I know you want to jump in, but I have to go in 4 minutes, so I just want to quickly say a few things. So, Sam, you had a great phrase as we were texting about this. You said we're in a grieving process. And that's a perfect phrase to describe what evangelicals are going through right now. Because it was this sort of tragedy. The whole Trump phenomenon was a tragedy, because here was this guy, this weird outlier,
Exactly zero evangelicals liked Trump before he ran for office in 2016.
Exactly. He was an old school Democrat, basically. He and Bill Clinton went golfing together, okay? And he still is that guy. Always has been.
And who knows what they did in the clubhouse after they went golfing.
And who knows? We're not going to go there. But okay, so just who is this guy? But he seems to be the only guy who can win for some reason, because he's got this weird charisma. Okay, this is our battering ram. Let's use it, I guess. And Meg talks about, Meg says, look, it was completely fair for evangelicals to say this might be our one shot to overturn Roe versus Wade. And let's try and wield power for the good, even though this is sort of a weird bargain and nobody saw this coming. But I'll vote for Trump, I guess. Sure, fine. But at what cost? And that's the question that I don't think that Meg had to answer that question in this book, because it wasn't
it's not her burden.
Yeah. That's not right. It's not Meg's burden, but it is a legitimate question to ask. And now I think, as you look at what's happened with the Republican platform, you look at the way that socially conservative delegates were just steamrolled at the RNC. Like, nope, this has already been written. You don't get to speak. You don't get to have input. This has been done already. You're just like, there's no reason for you to be here, basically. It's like, oh my gosh. And then Trump's son going, this is who my dad's always been. He's always been socially liberal. He doesn't care about this stuff. It's like, okay, interesting. And the problem is that, a lot of the voices like French or, Goldberg, the dispatch guys, who, it's not that they were wrong to sound those warning bells and say those things about Trump at the beginning. Even I kind of had a never Trump sort of a phase. But the issue is those guys burned their credibility by making everything all about Trump and being ungracious and dunking on everyone who voted for Trump. So now they don't really get to speak into this conversation anymore. Their credibility's gone, okay? And the Dispatch Review is just perpetuating that whole thing. So you've got the Dispatch crew, the Never Trumpers on one hand. You've got the, lesser two evils, we got to keep voting for Trump forever people on the other hand. And then you've got people like me, and Trip too, I would guess, who I'm just like, no, I'm an old school fusionist conservative, and I have now accepted the fact that there is no party for me. And here I stand. I could do no other. But that's hard. It's a difficult conclusion to come to, and that's where the word grief comes in, I think. And with that, I'm out. I'm going to lose this room. I'll just leave the studio. Have fun without me. I'll catch you later.
Thanks, Bethel. I really appreciate your contribution.
Thanks so much. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks. See ya.
Peace out.
Yeah.
So, Trip, what do you think should be our relationship to politics?
I mean, I think that's a really hard question. I guess for me, the way that I look at it is your theology driving your politics, or is your politics driving your theology? And whether or not I trust what you're saying,
and I don't even know if it's so much theology. So much of what's driving things are just social pressure. And I haven't read the book yet. I haven't looked at it, but from the little things that I've seen is the book was just sort of sold on money, and there is a lot of money around if you do things the way people want you to do. There are grants that you can look for, et cetera, et cetera. And you always have to be careful of the influence of money. But it's also whose in whose eyes do you want to shine? In whose esteem do you want to grow in? What opportunities, if you schmooze up to someone, will that afford for you down the way? And or whose condemnation are you desperate to avoid? So again, I think I loved what Jonathan did there. You can, listen to more of what Tripp said. The whole conversation with Sam Tripp and Bethel I thought was great. Nuance. And of course, you disagree with them too. I mean, it's fine. But again, look at the dynamic that Peugeot laid out and say, must I react in the way that all of these supposed allies are demanding I react? And if I don't react in that way, then I'll be an enemy and they're going to come to get them. That is the law of the jungle. That is a tyrannical situation. And you really don't want to be in groups like that. You're better off looking for a group that says, tell me what you think, and let's talk about it. And okay, here are these ambiguities. And what ambiguities ask for is higher resolution in order to make a decision. And now, of course, it's difficult because you need coalitions, and politics is always about building coalitions to achieve certain things. And almost everything that you can absolutely achieve in politics is usually a half measure, because that's the nature of politics, and you're working for agreement with people with whom you have disagreements, and on and on and on. So, yeah, and so again, for me, when I came to the end of this video with Sam and Tripp, and after I watched Jonathan's video, I felt tremendously blessed, because what did I want that I didn't even know I wanted? I wanted I want an in-person community. I have an in-person estuary, and I have a church. But I also wanted an online community of smart people and good people who I trust, who I know, don't know them real well, but a little bit. I've been with Sam in person. I've been with Bethel in person. I don't think I've ever been with Tripp in person. But we covered that to a degree in the live stream this morning too, when maybe I'll play that.
The fourth wall thing. I attended my first live estuary at Von Dock's in Chino, so I got the full Von Donk experience. There's meeting. He didn't remember me from any of our encounters through the live streams, and which I didn't expect him to, but I certainly remembered him. And there's no experience like meeting Von Donk in person. And then I had this horrific idea of what if I met the two of you in the same room, and I think it might go on Dutchman overload, because I just can't imagine. If I could describe how many people, raise your hands if you've met Von Donk in person. Anybody other than Paul? We got one. Okay. Well, first off, you shake his hand. It's like gripping a hold of a boulder. Okay, shaking his hand it's
milking hand. Really?
I know. I believe you. I believe you. And it is a big personality, and you're never going to get that through the screen in a million years. No. And I met Jason in person, and that was different than meeting him. And I got to meet Trey and Andrew in person, and I didn't expect to enjoy that, being in their presence as much as I did. Encountering them on screen, one thing; meeting them in person, completely different. It's like, oh, I want to see those guys again. Like, even though they could be my children. I mean, they're that young, and I'm that old. Boomer quintessential.
Was Federici there for that meeting or not?
Yes, Federici was there. Yeah, I met Jacob.
Good.
And that was interesting too. So the live, and I've gotten to do some of the virtual non-estuaries with Chad, and that experience is still, it's just, it's the immediacy of an in-person situation. I don't have it increases the level of social anxiety if you're given to that. I mean, it's that you don't get on screen. And so it just seems to me, well, all I'm saying is all of this is just emphasized to me the value and importance of my work locally in my local church and in my community, in my town. I mean, this is great, but I think it's still the neighborhood, the family, the city you're in. That's where it's at. This is good training. This is a good place for bouncing off ideas. I think there is certainly growth and room for places where you can grow here, but I think there is a limit that I experienced when I just from that brief estuary thing, that is just like, oh, okay, now I see there's still more work to be done.
Part of what, not only are we sort of figuring out the rearrangements of religion and politics, we're figuring out how these platforms and ourselves as avatars on platforms, and how that's related to the spirits that are running through, and these totalitarian spirits that are sort of trying to divide us and make us pick. Well, it's this or that, and it's like, is it? It's this or that right now. Will it be that way tomorrow? What if I don't? And again, sometimes don't is exactly the wrong answer. Sometimes must, but it takes wisdom to figure all of that out. So, all right, I think that's good enough for now. And yeah, again, sorry it hasn't been a lot of videos lately. It's just been busy. But I will post the Freddie and Paul show that I just made with Freddie right now, and then I will go home and rough draft. I'll put this in No Wait No Ads. Rough draft for Sunday will be on Saturday. Still haven't accomplished a new Heidelberg Catechism series, but I've not given up on that. That will come once I get sort of all of the Living Stones stuff settled and get more of a normal routine. I'm very much a guy who likes his routine and his regularity, and my conversation with Richard Rowland, he's like, where do you want to be in 5 years? It's like exactly where I am now, and maybe it's not terribly ambitious of me. I don't know if I will get to be where I am right now in 5 years. Things come upon me, and I must change, and I must do things, and other things are demanded, and of course I have to always listen for the call of God to go here or go there or do this or do that. But yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what you think.